Get outside and enjoy time with friends and family over MEA break. Today we're going to jump right back into Unit 4, World War I, and we will look at 5.2, the home front during World War I. All right, so we'll look at the home front, what was going on in the United States as the war started. So I have a YouTube link here for you. It's Coldplay song All Your Friends. It's about 3 minutes long. Take some time to listen to that and consider the meaning of the lyrics while you listen. There's some great footage as well from the battles of World War I. So the U.S. needs to mobilize for war. Another word for mobilize is prepare, right? How does the United States prepare for war? So there were three keys in this preparation and mobilization. That was military, economy, and public support. So we're going to look more in depth on those three areas of how the United States prepared for World War I. Starting with military mobilization. All right, so the U.S. Army was only a small fraction of the size of European armies at the time. So the Selective Service Act, also known as the draft, was a draft for young men for military service in Europe. The government held a great national lottery in July to decide the order in which the first draftees would be called into service. All right, so down here, this is an example of a registration card in which those young men would have to fill out, and then that would go into the Great National Lottery. All right, so the Selective Service Act was a way to get more young men in our U.S. Army to send over into World War I. Next, economic mobilization. So the War Industries Board was developed, which basically linked and created a cooperation between government and private business. All right, so thinking about private businesses that could help manufacture things that we could use in the war cause. So that was another way we could control materials. All right. So this is a nice graphic from your textbook over here to your right. It's showing, like, for instance, this bar graph here, the rising production between 1915 and 1918. The orange is manufacturing. I mean, manufacturing absolutely shot up during World War I. Obviously, manufacturing weapons and different things that we needed in the war. And then agriculture there, that yellowish green, decreasing at that time. So war production going up and agriculture going down. So the last part for preparing and mobilizing for the war was public support. How could we get the citizens of the United States on board with our war efforts in Europe with the Allies? So the Committee on Public Information, also known as the CPI, vocabulary term in our textbook, their job was to convince Americans that the war effort was a just cause. So that committee was out convincing Americans why we took part in World War I. Three important key terms we'll talk about: propaganda, which was opinion expressed to influence others. A very popular way to spread propaganda is through posters, and we'll take a look at those later today. Espionage Act were fines and prison for anti-war activities. So once the Espionage Act was signed, you could be fined or put in prison for going against the United States' involvement in World War I. The Sedition Act also made it illegal to criticize the war. So it was illegal to criticize our involvement in World War I, politicians or military leaders that supported that. You might be thinking that goes against an amendment of ours, and we'll talk about that here in a second. So this is another graphic out of your textbook showing espionage and sedition court cases during World War I. Okay, so many of these cases, as you can see, people were being accused of going against World War I. The argument that these people were making, and groups of people, is that The Espionage and Sedition Acts are against the First Amendment, which is the freedom of speech. Okay, so we'll see that come up time and time again throughout this unit. So last slide here of information. We're going to look at how the war changed American society. And really it changed three main groups. So women were able to welcome new opportunities during World War I. As men entered the armed forces through the draft and other ways, and they were overseas, many women moved into the workforce because all those jobs needed to be filled. So factories, railroads, telegraph operators, trolley conductors, women were able to come in and fill those spots. Then African Americans in the Great Migration. W.E.B. Du Bois, who you should remember from the Progressive Era, Unit 2, he viewed World War I as an excellent opportunity to show all Americans the loyalty and patriotism of African Americans. Okay, and how they did that was he wanted as many African American men as possible to enlist in the army, okay, to show that loyalty and patriotism. W.E.B. Du Bois felt that would be a really big step in civil rights and hopefully ending discrimination. The Great Migration, it's a term describing when African Americans moved north for economic opportunities. We just looked at that graph and how many manufacturing jobs were created during this wartime era. So there were some opportunities there in factories, as well as to escape the Jim Crow laws in the South. Then lastly, Mexicans move north. So as we were just talking about, increased wartime demands for food and a decrease in American farm workers created jobs that Mexican migrants were able to fill. Is there's an increased wartime demands for food, filling food to then go overseas and just in our country in general. And a lot of those farm workers either were enlisted and or filled some factory positions. So there were jobs available that Mexican migrants were able to fill agriculturally. All right, so today you're going to look at some propaganda posters to wrap up 5.2, taking a look at propaganda. So as always, if you have any questions, please shoot an email to your teachers. Other than that, have a great day.